Someone stands just a little too close. A reply seems too short. A compliment seems to come from out of nowhere. You weren't expecting it, but now you're wondering, what does this mean? When people break the invisible rules of communication, something really powerful happens. And it's exactly what expectancy violation theory explains. Welcome to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart. And in this episode, we are talking about expectancy violations, or EVT. One of the most useful theories for understanding the subtle rules of space, tone, and timing in our everyday lives. EVT was developed by Judee Burgoon in the 1970s and helps us unpack what happens when people don't behave the way that we expect them to, and why these moments are often the most meaningful to us. Let's dive in. Now, at its core, expectancy violations theory is about how people respond within their communication and what happens when expectations are disrupted. Now, Burgoon originally focused on proxemics, and this is that aspect of nonverbal communication about personal space. So if you're a Seinfeld's fan, think about those close talkers. But the theory has since expanded to include really any kind of behavioral expectancy. And what's important to remember is we all carry these mental scripts and these rules about how close someone should stand to you, how quickly someone should respond back to a text, and how a boss should address an employee. But when these expectations are violated, we notice, and we then start to evaluate the person, the situation, and the meaning of what is being done. So it's important for us to think about what you think should happen in a situation and what this is actually based on. Well, it's based on three main things. First, it's based on the context. Is this formal? Is this casual? So, for example, if you were attending a rock concert, is this a formal event or is this a casual event? What kind of clothing would you expect people to be wearing at a rock concert versus, let's say, a ballet? And let's say you're at the ballet and you see someone in clothing that you typically see at a rock concert. Your brain is going to start judging and start asking some questions. And I don't mean judging in a harsh way. I just mean you're going to notice and go, what on earth is happening here? That's not what I expected to see attending a ballet. So the context, what's happening in this situation, is going to be really important. The next piece of this is our relationship. Is this a stranger? Or is this somebody who I've known for a really long time, like a family member or a best friend? Now, if a stranger does something kind of wackadoo, I might not know what to expect. They're doing something that is out of the ordinary. Let's say, for example, clucking like a chicken, waving their arms around and bark, 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 acting like a chicken, all right? If I see a stranger just walking down the street, flapping their arms and balking like a chicken, I'm probably going to be concerned about their mental health. However, if my best friend were to walk up my driveway doing that same thing, believe it or not, friends, I wouldn't be all that surprised, because she and I love to send silly chicken videos to each other. And I'm pretty sure that if I were the one acting like a chicken walking up her driveway, she would simply laugh at me, know what I'm referencing, and it would be fine. She probably wouldn't have me committed that day. But if I was doing that and we didn't have that context, she would probably, because we have that relationship, be a little concerned and ask me what I'm doing. But again, she knows I'm a silly person, so she's probably just going to think, oh, there goes Malynnda being ridiculous again. Because we have that kind of relationship. If that wasn't our relationship, she'd probably be worried about me and maybe calling for a doctor to come do some type of psych test. But how close do I know that person? If I'm having a bad day and I'm being particularly snippy at her, we have a long-standing relationship, and while she's not going to like it, and while she is going to call me out on my stuff, we're going to be able to work through it. If a stranger is coming at you and being very negative and snipping at you, you might not want to get to know more about that person. That may be enough for you to say, no, you stay over there. Because that relationship hasn't been built. And so you are not going to tolerate the same types of behaviors that you would from your best friend with a stranger. And lastly, we need to think about the communication characteristics and the characteristics of the actual person speaking. What's their role? Their age, their gender? What are aspects of who they are that may be contributing whether or not this behavior is okay? So for example, we'll bring back that chicken behavior. If your boss were to come into a room and start balking like a chicken, that's not a characteristic that you would expect to see from a boss. So it's going to be very jarring. It's going to be very concerning. And it's going to raise some uncertainty about what is happening. All right, if a little kid is walking around balking like a chicken and they're 3 years old, okay, that's going to make sense. Someone in their 60s, going to make less sense. I think you get the point. Now, how positive or negative the violation feels is going to be what we called violation valence. And this is the surprise hug from a friend that's going to feel warm. But if you get a surprise hug from your boss, maybe not so great. So there is a continuum, again, based on the context, based on the relationship, based on the communicator characteristics, that is going to decide and determine how uncomfortable we feel with this violation. Is this a major violation, or is this just, a slightly, why did you do that type of violation? Now, there's another type of valence that we need to talk about, and that's called the communicator reward valence. And how much power, attractiveness, or importance you assign to that person. Now, the same violation might feel different depending on who commits it. If you are a How I Met Your Mother fan, you might remember the Dahmer-Dobler effect, or theory, that Ted comes up with. And he talks about if someone likes you and they do a grand gesture to get your attention, if you like them back, then it's a Dobler. And if you don't recognize that reference, you break my heart because you are a child. Just kidding. But the idea is that if you like that person and they are doing this big grand gesture and you like them, then this is going to be seen as sweet and wonderful and a unexpected surprise, and it's going to go over really well. But if this same grand gesture is done, the exact same thing is done by somebody who you don't like, you are not attracted to, it can come off as serial killer crazy, otherwise known as Dahmer. So, again, if you don't know who these people are, I get that the story is totally going over your head. That's okay. Skip 10 seconds. We'll be done with it. But this idea, regardless, is the idea that if you like the person, you're going to interpret this grand gesture one way, and that same gesture can be taken a completely different way if you don't like the person in return. So what is the reward for this behavior? And if I like you, then it's going to be a really great reward. If I don't like you, oof, all bets are off, and you're probably going to freak me out. So let's think about some real world applications besides just, the dating context, but that's a number one that we can think of, and how expectancy violations helps us to explain why people ghost, why they overshare, why they might be texting too much, or at least why we might be thinking that they're texting too much. Violating expectations, whether that's good or bad, can shape attraction or disinterest. As soon as you get that ick feeling, we're done. And those behaviors that we weren't expecting can contribute to getting the ick. Now, in professional spaces, a CEO who swears casually might increase relatability. I certainly hope so, because I do swear sometimes. But if I was swearing in the wrong context, if I was swearing at a board meeting, that can really destroy my sense of credibility. And one thing to note about credibility, I don't get to decide how credible I am. Now, I know I'm a very credible source, but it's really up to the audience to see and give me that level of credibility. And if they don't appreciate my colorful language, that can really knock me down a bit, and they can see me as not as credible. This really depends on your expectations. And we're going to talk a lot about, how expectations come into play. But the really big reason that expectations are important for this theory is because when we don't have them met, we feel that there's been a violation. So, in social media, we'll give this as a last little area of application. In social media, we think of TikTok trends that break the norm. Dancing in a grocery store aisle, for example. Filming awkward moments. These are violations that often get attention because they're breaking the script. They're going against the norm, and therefore it's making people think. It's making people, wonder what is going on. Again, maybe it could be that context. Maybe it's the person. Maybe it's the role. You wouldn't expect your nurses to start doing moonwalking exercises down and up the hallway. So, just like I'm going to do with all of our theories, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about what some of the other scholars think and what are some of the critiques of this theory. So, critics of EVT say that it oversimplifies power dynamics, that not all people can violate norms in the same way and get away with it. And I think this is a really, really valid critique of this. Because as I said, there are certain people that can just go out and do crazy things and we're not going to think anything of it. But not everyone is given that same space. So there's some really interesting avenues to research and look at who has the power to do the chicken walk and who might that be a real problem for, who would be really silenced, who would get canceled for doing that same behavior. And I actually think cancel culture, I just mentioned flippantly, but cancel culture I think is a really good way of thinking about who gets canceled and who doesn't. What is it that the one person did that was a problem? And are there other people who have done similar things that didn't get canceled? Where's that power coming in and how is that working in that situation? Another critique is that our expectancies aren't always rational or conscious. They're shaped by culture, class, gender, but they're also shaped by trauma. And if you've had bad experiences, for example, let's say you have a fear of chickens. I don't know why I'm obsessed with chickens today, but we're going to roll with it. But if I have a really bad experience around chickens, my expectations are probably not going to be conscious. I might not remember this horrific experience that I had a chicken when I was 3 years old, but now I know that anytime I see anything chicken related, I have a bit of a reaction. We'll roll with it. So it may be something from our past that we're not even really consciously thinking about it. And they might as well be completely irrational. Who knows? So we have to think about where these expectations are coming from and how much power we're actually giving to them. But still, expectancy violation theory gives us a clear, flexible tool to understand how surprise, awkwardness, unexpected behaviors are going to shape our interactions. So, what have I hope you've learned today? Well, I hope that first you realize that we all have silent expectations for how people should behave. Now, I do think we need to make them a little less silent sometimes, especially as parents. What expectations do we have for our children and how they should behave, whether that's in the home or out in public? We have to talk about these expectations. If you have expectations for your partner, for your friends, it's really important that we share what those expectations are. We can't hold someone to an expectation that when they violate it, we hold that against them. But they didn't know what that expectation was. So I really think it's important that if you have expectations for how your partner, your family member, your children are supposed to behave, or how you want them to communicate with you, you need to take it upon yourself to make sure that those expectations are clearly defined and discussed. Second, I hope that you learn that when someone violates those expectations, it forces our brains to think about us and how we are interpreting that meaning. What does violating that expectation mean for that relationship? And how am I interpreting it as a whole? And finally, we want to think about how we evaluate those moments and how that depends on both the behavior and the person engaging in that behavior. We'll get more into some of this later, but it's just on a starting point. How are we evaluating what they're doing and who's doing it? Do I have the same expectations for the people that are my friends, and do I have different expectations for my partner? Now, next time in our next episode, we are going to be exploring family communication patterns. And some of these expectations are going to come directly from how we were raised and how these patterns that were set by our families are going to shape the relationships we have later on. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I will see you in the next class. And until then, keep communicating.